Welcome to this week's episode of the First Moves podcast. Today we're joined by Peter Holmark, an experienced executive coach who's worked with top CEOs and senior leaders across industries. In this episode, Peter shares practical insights from his coaching career, including actionable frameworks you can apply as a leader and the most common challenges high-level executives face. If you want to deepen your understanding of leadership and grow as a leader yourself, then this episode is for you. We hope you enjoy. Peter, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast today, all the way from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Could you introduce yourself a little bit?
Yes, sure. So I'm Peter Holmark, originally from Denmark, but as you said, now I live in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh. I'm focusing my time here on coaching and leadership development. My mission here is to help the kingdom on the transformation journey they're on. And my little value out of that will be to make it easier, better, and more effective for them. So this is something that I spend a lot of my career on, my time on. I'm passionate about leadership development and coaching. It's something I did before. I worked many years before here in Nokia. A lot of transformation in telecom sector. I was in different HR roles. I've been in the business side. And way back when I started my career, I did also consulting and engineering. So it's kind of my 10th different kind of career, if you put it as a top label right now, and I'm still enjoying it here. Lived in different places of the world and also worked in other places of the world as well.
And then what drew you to this kind of 10th part of your career?
By nature, I'm very curious. So I always try to evolve and I see, this is interesting. What can that lead to? So when you have that curiosity, things evolve and evolve, and actually people start to invite you into new things because there is a space where open-minded and like-minded people actually want to create something new together that we may not have seen before, we may not have the answer. So this is one element of the evolving. Another one is that I think, without being too humble, that when you do good work, it opens up opportunities to actually get to the next stage. So you also need to put yourself in a position where you're actually delivering on your mandate, your objective, what you're supposed to be doing. And that gives you the opportunity to come into something new. So it's kind of from performance and curiosity perspective. I think these two things, Sebastian, is kind of two horses in front of the carriage that drives it forward.
Yeah. And then when I look on your LinkedIn, it's very impressive. You post a lot. You post a lot of different things about leadership. But in your LinkedIn bio, you mention that you orchestrate winning people performance. What exactly does that mean to you?
Yes, good point. It's something that took me a while to come to, and it's close to my heart, and it's close to my purpose. So if I try to break this down, I have experienced in my career and also my personal view that there's no good business performance without good people performance. So for me, these two things are integrated. I have seen leaders and businesses only focusing on business results. It's very short term, but long term sustained growth, positive results, good business. It's people performance is part of it. I also think that business and people connect, so it's not one or the other. So I always, in my own work, try to do something that's good for business through the dimension of people, whatever I do on the people side. So it's always at that crossroad I tend to work. And for me, the orchestration means that I don't have to be the one at the end of the table. I don't have to be the one who's leading it. And I think leaders should not always just be the one who need to set the direction. You need sometimes to work on the system, see it from the outside. Can you empower people? Can you orchestrate that we get into the right direction? And then people have freedom and opportunities to find their own path. Short term, very flexible, but long term, we are getting into the right direction. So it's kind of why I think it's orchestration and it's winning people performance, which for me combines business and people performance. It's two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. And if you would give advice to someone who's listening to this right now, who is a leader, how would you orchestrate this?
I would say it's interesting for a leader to step back and see, how am I leading? Am I only always using the same style, the same approach? Whether I'm always very informal. So am I always walking around with a cup of coffee and trying to chat with people, keep them motivated? If that's all I'm doing, or mainly that style, or I'm only talking to my team in formal reviews, meetings with PowerPoints and presentations. So trying to understand, are you using a big range of leadership styles and approaches? That will be orchestration. And then I will also try to say to the leaders, try to monitor your speak to listen ratio. If you're always the one speaking, it's very hard to orchestrate. And I think if you use analogy to maestros who are conducting an orchestra, I think they're also listening a lot to the orchestra before they actually make their moves. So those would be some of the things I would give as first advices: self-awareness and self-assessment.
So that's kind of like, instead of being the one speaking so much, you take a step back and you kind of try to get that third point view on it, the helicopter perspective, kind of just listen to your employees, and then after that you can respond.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes, it's very interesting what you say there, that actually sometimes there's also inner dialogue in a leader. No matter how senior and experienced you are, you need to process your own inner dialogue. And if the situation calls for that, you need to create clarity, come with clear direction. It's fine, but you make it as a mindful step. You decide, and then you move forward. Yeah. So this is kind of that space that helps you to put the right approach. That's most relevant for the situation.
Yeah. And how do you think this differs in sizes of organizations, even if it does differ in sizes of organizations?
I think when you come to bigger organizations, it creates a lot more complexity. You have staff functions, you got different teams, you got units, and whether we like it or not, big organizations have silos because this team does this, and this team needs to do finance, and they do marketing, or we work on new products. So it becomes very difficult to actually create your own style.
Yeah.
Because big organizations tend to gravitate towards, we want this from you, whether it's just to connect the dots or it's just to report upwards or ensure performance. So big organizations sometimes push leaders into only using a little bit of what they can do as a leader and as a human leader. And on the other side, if you pivot back into small organization, well, that has the challenge that people are maybe focused too much on the tasks. So you're not necessarily orchestrating the bigger picture because you're just struggling from 1 month to 1 month and 1 week to 1 week. So each organization has its challenges in that setup.
You mentioned before that you also held some leadership development positions, like at Nokia and some bigger companies beforehand. What experience do you take from that into your coaching that you do now for leaders?
Well, my time at Nokia, it really taught me a lot. First of all, standards, good assessment instruments, good standards for what we're doing around here, where we apply certain methodologies, certain standards across any leadership challenge or situation or development we need to go through this. So setting the standards is really something that helps me from that time a lot to do. I also got acquainted with a lot of good assessment instruments from that time, which is also very handful when I use them now in my business here. And I think that the culture from working for a Finnish company was how you set the intention for what you're going to do with your leadership development and your coaching engagement and your assessment, that you help to set the cultural frame and the whole purpose around why we're doing this. So it's not something that's to handle your bad performance or the threat response. It's something that is to help you to get to the next level. So that's some of the lessons I took for my 20 years with Nokia. There's probably many more, but at least that's the top of my head.
And talking about that the cultural circle you're talking about, you also were in companies that are very multicultural. So you have people from all kinds of nationalities working for the company, but you also have offices in different countries. How does leadership development look within that when you have a team that's half in one country and half in another country?
It's a really good point. So culture is something we don't see, but is always there. So what I came to realize with some years is that you have different layers of culture. So I remember there was a certain point where we were with Nokia and we bought a small company in Japan. So there we had the Japanese cultural context. We had the corporate culture around that organization. And then we had the fact that they never worked with teams across different countries, where we came in and we had teams working distributed, and that kind of works for us. So it plays a tremendously important factor to success by understanding culture and being open and explore it and understand what are the different aspects of culture that is the most important here, and then be curious to understand how did they emerge? Why is that an important topic for this organization, for this team? How did they arrive at that it's coffee at 8 o'clock in the morning, or the vice president has designed a designated parking spot, or whatever that is. So understanding the history, that helps you tremendously to then take it to the next level. So culture is as multifaceted as any other aspects of leadership.
Yeah. And I think also the cultural aspect of all these things is probably one of the most difficult ones to understand, because, as you said, you can't see it. It's not tangible. So it takes a lot of time to understand it and figure out what is the culture here actually. So when you coach people now in leadership positions, is this a big part of it as well, as understanding what is the culture within the company when you give advice to the leaders?
Yes. I find that whether we are talking about high performance or we are having some challenging situations, the culture always come in and has various aspects. This is something that may be, how should I put it? Well, a typical case is that performance is maybe not what we like it to be. And part of that discussions, there's an emergent theme that we set up this team to work in a certain way. And that's been the culture because that was what the situation called for. And now the situation has changed. But the situation changed tremendously faster than the culture changed. So that's always a challenge in that regard. Another aspect on leadership or culture is obviously how do you communicate across different cultures. There are different ways we like to communicate, there are different ways we like to get things done, and involvement in decision making, yes or no. So that also plays into successful leadership across different cultures. I would say whether you take a geographical culture, a leadership culture that the leader is actually shaping, or it's a team culture, there's always an aspect of that onion that you need to unpeel to actually create a successful path forward.
Exactly. And I think the peeling of that onion is it's a really good analogy, because it's really layer by layer that you do it. And it's difficult to get into the center of it really quickly. As you say as well, the culture moves slowly, but the actions move quickly. So it's very difficult to get that aligned properly. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that corporations have. And the bigger you get, the bigger that issue is going to be.
Oh yeah, well, for sure. And you may also have that when you're doing a lot of mergers and acquisition, which I've also been part of, that you see cultures merging, and you can actually have business that get tanked by a merger because the cultural aspect was not taken into account. And I've seen that, and that actually made the business not being successful. And it was simply related to culture. It was not a good fit. So it is very important.
Yeah. You've coached senior leaders when they're on the top of their game. You've coached a lot of different CEOs and business leaders. In your view, what is the key that separates the exceptional from the merely effective people when you look at leadership?
I think it's a good question. So exceptional leaders, I mean, it comes, I would say exceptional leaders always have a tremendous amount of self-awareness. Either it's built by a lot of battle scars, they've done something, they learned from it, or they've done a lot of assessments, or they created a culture where they get continuously input and get sparring and discussions that helps them to try to think about that. So that self-awareness is something that sets really good and great leaders apart. Another thing is that really successful senior leaders are able to both drive performance and zoom in on a detail, but actually also maintain a view of the whole system, whether the system is I'm operating in this market with 40 countries, or we are now in a situations where we are impacted by the political situation, so on, so on, so. So they have this understanding of what comes from outside the team and what comes from inside the team, and how they balance this in a clever way. I also think that really successful leaders are very good in managing their own energy. Mm-hmm. It's so easy when you come to a very senior position to be eaten up because there's so many demands on you and they're all strategic and important and so on and so forth. And it's difficult to say no. So managing your own energy and also setting the boundaries in a good way. Yeah. And then I would say the last aspect would probably be humbleness. Being humble to, although you may be a senior leader like CEO, vice president, senior vice president, or general manager, to step back and rethink what you thought was right. Mm-hmm. It's tremendously powerful to be open to rethink. That's some of the things, at least.
Yeah, so like having the ability to take criticism as well, and I think it's one of the things as well. This self-awareness is the ego, that you don't have a huge ego, so you take in as well what your employees are telling you. That's part of it.
Yes. And actually, to that point, I think, I also worked many years in HR. I think sometimes HR is actually not helping our senior leaders very well. I have been working with organizations where, for all the good intentions, HR said, well, these senior leaders, they need a designated parking spot. Okay. So I don't meet the ordinary people there. Maybe I have a separate lift that takes me to the 10th floor where my office is. So I don't hang out and listen to the frontline people and hear what they're saying. So I don't get a lot of signal for the organization. And maybe I have some additional privileges that make me feel like I'm very important. So we may have HR and policies that actually puts leaders in a worse situation, but we have the best intentions. So I think HR play a key role in setting the boundaries. And sometimes they're helping and sometimes they're not helping great leaders to have that transparent view of the world and rethink. Because they prop them up, so to speak.
Yes, exactly. And that's also why here now, when you look at someone like, for example, Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, there's a lot of stories about them going into the factories and actually walking around among the people, building their products and listening to what their problems are and going down the levels. Now, it can be a PR thing. They can actually have done it. I don't know. But in the ideal world, that is something that a good leader would do, is sometimes just to go down and see how's it actually going on below. But then we get into the point as well of the energy management, because that obviously takes a lot of time. And my question would be, if I would come to you, I'm a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and I say, Peter, I need some help. I cannot manage my time anymore. I have no energy. How should I go about this? What would be your kind of like start point to unravel that?
Well, it sounds like a simple problem, but it's actually very complex. So I would try first to really go slow and try to understand all the different aspects of the leader's job and the roles. One is, what is the expectations from what do they have to deliver? And what are the perceived expectations from them as a role? Sometimes we put on that stress on ourselves because we need to show up in a certain way. Mm-hmm. Then I would try to understand what aspects of the relationships they have with various stakeholders and people in the team is contributing to this, and what aspects of the culture they try on, they actually try to enforce or they try to build in the team may help them or may not help them. And then there's obviously, once you have that good conversation, then it's always a turning point for me to say, if you signed a non-disclosure agreement that is all confidential, then I ask them to show me your calendar. And for me, this is a revealing point. How you spend your time says everything.
Yeah.
You may have all these ideas, but if it does not reflect in how you spend your time and priorities and what you send your secretary to pull through to you and not, then it's worth nothing. So I just try to do a very big 360 diagnostics first. And we very often come out with, there's tend to be a couple of very revealing points. And it's never the same, but sometimes when leaders get to a higher position, they forget to tell the other people below them in the teams that now I need to delegate more. Now I changed my role. Now you also need to step up, and this is how I help you, and this is how you can do more, and so on. They just don't tell them. So they don't communicate well what's the game plan and how we're going to work together and what are you accountable for and so on and so forth.
And you just mentioned now one of the tools, which is the 360 feedback tool. You also use the Hogan and the OPQ tools, which when I did the research on it, these tend to give some of the deepest insights. But why do you use them? Is that because of the deepest insight, or is there a different reason that you use those tools specifically for coaching?
Yeah, I mean, I have used both of them for quite some years, and I like the fact that Hogan. I'm a big fan of using the Hogan suite. I like the fact that it's built on real leaders' performance on the job. This is how they come into it. So it's not very academic, very theoretical. It's practical. Secondly, it gives you a very good 360 view of the leaders, whether it's what energy they bring into the job, what are the dark sides, and what are the motives, values, and what are the personal drivers. So it gives so many touch points to help a leader with self-awareness and identify how can we do things better. I think also that I like the tools because they give you a lot of good data points, and that plus a good coaching conversation to help translate it into what it means for me is for me much more valuable than some other more lightweight tools where you get a report, it gives you some recommendation, and then you're left to your own devices by actually then what I'm going to do with that. So I think the Hogan and the certification with Hogan and OPQ helps you with a coach to debrief and then to creates actually a value add for the leader. And I think also it's good with leaders that although we think very often we are very unique, we are part of norm groups. There are leaders out there who have kind of the same situations, and using those data as reference points also helps to put your own challenges and strengths into the context.
Yeah, for sure. And then when you talk to these people when you do these coaching sessions with these leaders and everything, you get quite deep sometimes, because we have also done coaching sessions together, and sometimes we get quite deep into the values or some kind of issues there are in the company. But I'm quite interested to hear what you have discovered as being one of the things that most of these leaders struggle with, which is like if there's a common thing that most leaders struggle with.
Well, they're quite unique, but if you think about very senior leaders, there's a couple of things that tend to come across. That's actually the loneliness.
Loneliness. Mm-hmm.
So it's quite surprised when I start to work with more senior leaders to understand that they feel very lonely at a certain point. There's a lot of pressure. Some people have a misconception that when you're a very senior leader, you have a lot of freedom. Actually, the pressure is tremendously high.
Yes.
And there's not a lot of people you can go to. And if your context is you need to make the business grow, you need to turn around, you need to be successful. If the culture is also the leader is a hero, I may actually also feel very lonely, and I may not have somebody to talk to. Mm-hmm. That's situation with those leaders where we tend to go a little bit deep on some of these topics, because as a confidential chartered coach, you can actually also help the leaders having that space that you can actually talk to somebody about that and help you process things through. Yeah. Another aspect I can see of senior leaders is that they very often get the view of the world of the business is translated through other people. Either they get a report or somebody talks to them about that. So getting to the real truth, to the real facts, or walking the factory floor, as you said yourself earlier in this conversation, is something that helps the leaders get the real data, but it's very hard because we set up systems around them and they get information which is chewed by other people. Yeah. So this is another aspect. And then I also sometimes can see that in certain cultures and certain aspects of leadership, certain roles, they may get a little bit this inflated ego. Mm-hmm. Like if I'm a big leader and now all of a sudden I have all these privileges, it becomes my world, and I tend to just think Now I'm a little bit greater than other people, so that I may not listen, I may speak. Whenever I talk to people, I may want to project. It's almost like I'm giving a message, so I become less authentic. Then you give me a corporate jet, it looks nice to me. So we actually may also have that as a challenge, that the leader become not true to themselves. And they may not see themselves into this, which then leads to the fact that long term it depletes them from energy. Because if I'm acting like this and I am like that as a person and it's not the same, well, you need to connect it somehow. That takes a lot of energy. So that's some of the common themes I've seen across very senior leaders that I've been working with.
And do you think that kind of like inflated ego, enjoying the lifestyle and stuff like this, is a compensation for the loneliness sometimes?
Absolutely. I think that's actually what do you do to compensate? People find tools and things to either tell themselves I'm okay, or they find a way to compensate, or we give them something that make them think about that rather than that. So it can actually be counterproductive. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And then talking about this kind of inflating ego, so when we talk about young entrepreneurs who make money very quickly, then that can also be one of those things. But when you're coaching, how do you coach differently when you're coaching like a rising star versus a seasoned executive?
Yeah, obviously the situation is very unique to the leaders' positions and what they want to work on and their goals, but the approaches tend to obviously to be very different. So when I work with the more emerging leaders who can be very successful financially and the business very successful, there tend to be a lot more about self-awareness, connecting to their values, trying to help them to ground them in something that's important for them. When you are successful very quickly, you may not have had the time or the opportunity to think this through. And so I help them with some tools to ground them on and get clarity around who am I and what's important for me. I also tend to focus the time on getting practical tools in place. They may not have seen the tools, they may not have some practical tips and tricks to actually help them to be successful. So that tends to be in that space. When I work with more senior leaders, it is a lot about the perception of them as a leader. It is a lot about what legacy do they want to give. So there tends to be always an aspect around how can I give back to the organization, to younger people, to society, whatever is important for them, in ways that's meaningful for them. So that's all about giving back, which actually feels very rewarding. That tends to come out. Plus, I tend to see, do they act as a tall tree that casts a long shadow? So because they're experienced leaders, they're seasoned leaders that probably have a big role in the organization or in the business, are they maybe sometimes casting a shadow that prevents other people from growing? So that tend to be at least some different approaches that come up again and again for these two client groups.
And when looking at like blind spots from a leadership perspective, what are the blind spots that are most common when you get from like, if let's say you work your way up, what are the most common blind spots you see in top leadership?
Yeah, common blind spot. It's a good question, actually. It depends a bit on culture as well. There tend to be sometimes a blind spot that I need to work with people at my level, not only the people who are above me or the people below me. So that tends to be a blind spot, which comes up very often in senior leaders 360 degrees assessment, that my internal stakeholders I need to work with. That tend to be a blind spot. They tend to like push through the results. And if there's an organization, a culture where we're very results oriented, well, we don't necessarily get that aspect in. So this is one blind spot I tend to see. Another blind spot is how I, as a leader, under pressure in a crisis, how my style and how I show up impacts the wider organization. So my self-image and the impact of the organization or the team when I don't have a good day because I'm under pressure for whatever reason. That's another blind spot, that people are not always managing their own self-image, particularly when it's not a scripted message in front of camera, but they're just not having a good day.
Yeah, and the emotions get a hold of it, and then you portray yourself a little bit differently than you would exactly want to in front of the team, and then you get into that. Yeah, and I think that now that you mentioned that with being a blind spot, I think that is something that probably it happens to all of us at some point. That we have a bad day. Obviously, when you're in a leadership position, you cannot have a bad day and be mean to your employees, but you will probably have a bad day at some point. So you need to be able to kind of pick yourself up and be in front of them. Don't show it.
Yeah. Short term, you need to do that, but I think there's also tremendous value if you create as a leader culture where you can come back to the team or the organization to say, "I'm sorry, this is what happened.
Yes.
I didn't mean to do that," and that vulnerability that you actually say, you show them I'm also human, and you reflect upon it. It can be very powerful as a leader when you do that. It's just very hard to do. It doesn't feel nice to come back and say, "Hey, I'm sorry," but once you create that as a culture, it's something you do. It can really create a lot of psychological safety, and it opens up for other people also recognizing that I need to also be mindful how I recover after not showing up and how can we improve. So it has a big impact on performance, psychological safety, and it starts with the leader.
Yeah, for sure. And you're now also working like with full organizations. So you mentioned you're trying in the kingdom to help the management there. What kind of programs that you're using have you seen truly make a difference within these companies?
It depends on the challenge you're having, obviously. So you need to be very clear on what's a mission. So these generic programs that try to cover some aspects of transformation, culture, leadership, whatever that is, I think that doesn't really work well. So I think what I see work well is that you tailor that to a specific situation. I think programs where you create some kind of organization alignment from top to bottom has a tremendous positive impact. Just the fact that we all aligned on what's important, where we're going, and it's not easy to do actually, but it has a tremendous impact. So having that as part of a program where you kind of align the organization on multiple levels is also very important. I think also try to have a practical application. So in structure-led things where you're in a classroom, you tell people, you work with them one-on-one, is taking you a little bit down the road in the right direction. But if you really want to ace the race, you have to also work with a group of leaders as a team, and you create that team dynamic, and then also create the organizational alignment. Plus, you need to have a practical implementation. So what are we then going to do practically in our work, in our team differently? Are we running a program? Are we doing initiative? So we take all of those things we talk about and we make them real. That's how you actually connect it into being very much an action-based learning, which also then have a quick turnaround on the return on investment because you have an impact through the work you're doing in the work, in the team, the process you want to change, things you want to improve better. So you need to have a multifaceted interventions. Otherwise, it doesn't really work.
Yeah. And then when you talk about aligning from top to bottom, do you think that when an organization sits down and says, "Oh God, this is horrible. We need to figure out something here for our change and leadership to get the company more profitable or better in kind of sense," is it then necessary to have a outside person like yourself come in and then like let them see what is wrong or tell them what's wrong? Or do you think that it's also possible from within the organization itself to start already changing?
Very much, I mean, it can very much be the case. And very often when you talk to organizations and different leaders, many of the answers they're seeking, they are there already. But they may be locked up in a team, in an organization, in a level of the organization where you don't see that. So coming from the outside, being seen as external, we can now have some other conversations. So we can be the catalyst in many different ways. And this is very powerful. Plus, looking at from the organization from the outside, where you can go and tell them exactly what needs to happen, and they cannot fire you because you're just not part of the team. It's also something that actually helps a lot to accelerate getting the truth on the table, so you can talk about it. And particularly in parts of the world where you have a big organization hierarchy and you've got a big power distance, getting somebody who aligns and get this translated the message at different levels so we all align, and the messages are how we understand that goal at each level, which may be different from a frontline leader, from a marketing, from a finance, from engineering. That's also something we can do from the outside because we see the whole system. So I think it can be very, very powerful.
So when we talk about this third person coming in, or like this third party coming in, like yourself, and then getting these different perspectives of the company, when you see organizations going through very disruptive change, what do leaders tend to overlook in their people management strategy?
Oh, that's a wonderful question because we often see that as being, well, the change didn't really work so well or didn't really go well. So it's very well researched. And I think I see one thing. We don't actively address the resistance to change. There is a need. It comes from the board. It comes from outside. The market is changing. We need to do it. So everybody has a sense of urgency. But the guy in the front line who's just trying to do his job, he's not interested in changing. Nobody told him anything. He's not interested. He don't want it. He may know that where we're going, I can never play here. So understanding the resistance to change and how can we help people looking at what is their resistance to change and what do we need to address with them, using models like SCARF model and looking from how we deal with change to move them on a journey. It's very often overlooked because we say we need to do this. Now we need to go. Right? It doesn't work. Resistance to change is one thing. Second is that the fact that strategies may change in a matter of months and quarters of years, but culture change in a wave of 7 years. So when we're not addressing the fact that we may have 10% who jump up and straight join you, we may have 20, 30, 40% who's kind of getting on board. Somebody's a follower, somebody's a laggard, that you don't have 100% of your workforce on the journey from day one, because you need also to work on the culture, you need to work on the communication, the change. Those are some of the aspects we very often forget because we are too much in a hurry. I think what good change programs do to actually prevent this from happening is to have a lot of consultations, a lot of discussions in the organization so we all understand this is now a journey we need to get onto. It's not just an email from the CEO. Now we're implementing this change initiative XYZ. So that's it. Resistance to change and culture.
Yeah, and how would you go about that? Because the resistance to change is also partly about motivation. How do you manage to motivate your employees to understand why this is important for the company? And so how would you go about designing an intervention that works across diverse teams when it comes from the top leadership?
Yeah, it's really a good point because it's very individual and very personal what motivates us. And when you understand what people sign up for when they join the organization, when they join the role they're in, you get some aspects around what motivates them. And when you have good line managers, they know what motivates each of the team member at each granular level. And this is where you need to start. So if I need to get Ahmed or I need to get John on a journey for me, the way I communicate, the way I try to influence them, the way I try to motivate them to get on a journey with me will be very different. So you need to have very good frontline leaders. This is a key aspect of driving that, which then means that any kind of intervention, you need to give leaders the tools, the clarity, the goals, so they can actually do the work with the teams. I don't think we can move team members on a journey like pieces on a chessboard. You need to help leaders actually make them want to be on a journey with you. So enabling leaders is part of any good, successful change program. Another aspect is to realize the simple fact that I can only motivate you so long and so far down the road. Part of it is your own personal motivation, what's in it for you as a person. So don't think you can drive motivation. Think that you can influence it to a certain aspect, and the rest is a little bit up to magic or luck or how you work with different leaders to make it work. You cannot control everything.
So there's a lot of myths about motivation as well, and how you need to motivate your team. There's a lot of different ways to do it. It's it's again, I think it's one of those things you said as well. It's a bit lucky that you get the right motivation kind of thing for your team, because every single person has a different form of motivation. But what would be one like kind of myth that leaders think is very motivating, but that you have actually experienced throughout the coaching that turns out not to be so motivating for the team?
Oh man, I've seen this a lot. So one key myth is that what motivates me is also what motivates my employees. So they are a mirror of me, and I hired them. We work well together. So we think we have this bias that they are a copy of me. So I'm just doing what works for me, and then it will work for them. This is the first myth. The second myth is that generally you can buy yourself into motivation things. So giving people something, you give them maybe you give them better tools, you give them better office, you give them salary increases, are very short term. So that's another myth, that I'm just doing this to fix it now and I must be happy. It drops again. I mean, the research shows us that 6 to 8 weeks after new salary, we're not more happy about our new salary. It's just kind of normal because now it's my salary. So all these kind of things at the surface level is very short term focused. Yeah, that's kind of the myth I see. Yeah.
I think that's a good one. You mentioned that with the salary, because that is one of the main things that people say. Okay, we want them to work a bit harder. Okay, we give them a salary increase to motivate them. But it's funny you say with the cycle that it's shown that like after 6 weeks, then you don't think about that anymore. Then it's okay. We're back to square one basically again. It's now normal.
Yes. So yeah. These are the kind of things. It's some factors that do not necessarily drive the motivation, because when you don't understand what motivates people, it can be very personal. What motivates me is something you can impact 50%. The other 50% is what motivates me. And if you don't understand that and you don't tap into that, because your line managers at the lowest level of organization don't know their people, because they don't spend time with the people, they don't go to the front line, they don't drive with them in the trucks, they don't go with them to the power plants, whatever they need to do, then that's the disaster. You have no clue what's important for them. And sometimes it's very simple things, like I'm interested in more autonomy. So if I can give you a report every 2 weeks instead of a report written in an email, I can have a meeting, discuss my report, and I give you my perspectives. I talk about that. I have more freedom. Simple things like this sometimes comes out of these good conversations, and you actually motivate people, because you either work on the motivation or you work on their skill level. So there's kind of different aspects you can work on, rather than just something I give them as a piece of candy, or something that's a salary or bigger company car or whatever I want to give them.
Yeah, I think this also comes back to the aspect that you mentioned in the beginning of the conversation about the values for people, and it's important to see what kind of values does a leader have. But I think this translates directly into the people you also hire. It's also a conversation that we've had for my own company about what are my values and what are the values of the employees you bring on board. And I think if you bring employees on board that have similar values, obviously it's not possible to get, when you have a big organization, everyone has the same values, but you can get on some similar line. And if you have that, then the motivational issue will also be less of an issue.
Yeah, I think you're right, because we kind of see the world the same way. We struggle with the same challenges. We get excited about the same things. And you have people who generally like to work in this place. And then it's 10 times easier to build up the skills and other things as well, if you see the world the same way. So I think it's good to hire for cultural fit, or I want to change the culture a little bit, and then you develop the skills as you go along, rather than the other way around, which I sadly also see in some kind of interviews where you only do skill-based interviews. It doesn't really work. You need to hire for cultural fit.
Yeah. Talk more about who's the person behind the skills. Yeah. Let's do a little trial exercise here, kind of thing. I'm a leader that is stuck right now. I'm overworked. I have too many things on my desk. I keep on getting more and more papers on my desk. And I come to you and say, this is a big issue right now. Where would you start with me to try to get me coached into more of a direction that would be more sustainable for myself?
Yeah, I would first try to understand if that's a new issue
Mm-hmm.
or it has always been like that. So I try to understand, is this something that has been growing over many years or many roles, that it's kind of, I'm always like this, means that, and what goes on in the back of my mind is that I may have been the expert previously in my career. I didn't need to delegate, and now I'm a bigger role. I have too much on the plate, and I didn't delegate. Could be one aspect. So I'm trying to understand, has it emerged quite recently, or is it something that's been tracking you all along? Secondly, on the motivation piece we just talked about, like, are you people just taking tasks from you? Are you giving the task and then they do the task? Or do they come back with problems and solutions? So do you help your team step up and develop? Very often I see in high pressured environments that the leaders may not develop their people because we are time and pressure and so on. And for some people, because they delegate upwards, it feels quite nice because I'm just doing my job and I go home. It's like done. Is that an aspect of this? And another one would be to understand then, as a third thing, when we get a little bit into the more higher level, is to see, are you clear on the mission and what's important? So we can start to say what's important, what's urgent. Is there something we can get rid of?
Mm-hmm.
Because like if you're a boat that's stuck, if you don't remove the stuff under the boat, it's not still going to be stuck. We are like a boat to sail again. Then we can know where we're going to go. So that will be kind of 3 steps approach I would take to that. But depending, of course, on the conversation, which way we will go.
Yeah, so it's a little bit that framework of that you have the 3 things. You have something that can be important, you have something that can be urgent, and you have something that can be important and urgent. And then you make the decision which one do you handle now, which is obviously the important, urgent one. That's what you handle right now. Then comes the urgent, and then comes the important. There's also some of the frameworks that we've been walking through with, because I obviously have a lot of my plate as well. And we've also run through this of like how do we build up everything so that you don't feel overwhelmed by all the emails coming in, all the tasks you have to complete still.
Yes. And Sebastian, what I want to add to that, what you just said there, I agree. I like the model, is that when you talk to senior leaders in big organizations, there's another aspect, if they've been growing up in the organization, that what is important for them, they carry with them all the way. So it may not be important for the organization, for the role, but for them, it's very important. I mean, I once worked with a leader who wanted to take all performance review he wanted to look through by himself personally, one by one by one, 420 of them. It was not important for the organization. There was a team like this, but for him, it was important. It has certain challenges, right? So you need to also understand that sometimes leaders hold a self-image of, this is important for me. And then you're there to do the business. You need to say, well, maybe that's something to let go of.
Yeah. And I think that's also, it's a difficult thing, right? Because if this is something that you've been doing since you got into lower management, now you're in the senior management, and then you want to look through all of these 420 reports, I think it might also, to a certain extent, be very difficult to let go of this. How is that a kind of conversation that you go about to tell them, like, hey, look, maybe you should try to analyze what is actually important, and how do you make people realize what is actually important for them and what is something that they should try to delegate or let go of?
Yeah, I mean, one thing is through coaching and conversation to understand. I mean, maybe you should wind that back. So I think in coaching that it's important to understand much more about the leader, at least when I work, where you need to understand more about them as a person. Excuse me, not just them as the business leader. So once you understand that, then you understand, is it important for them because it's from a person perspective, or is it from a leadership, the role needs this? So that's understanding much more about the leader to actually distinguish between that. Mm-hmm. Another thing is to focus on key transitions in the career. So what makes organization promote this leader? Why did you get the job? And of course, you've been successful. And if nobody comes and help you in your new role as a coach or as a good mentor, whatever, to say, well, in the new role, this is important for us. You get promoted because of this, but there's a new role. And we're not clear about that. So leadership transitions are key elements for leaders' performance to shift gears. And sometimes we can be more clear with leaders about now it's a new game.
Yeah, so it really, you really have to look at the aspect of everything from when they go up in the organization as well. Everyone has their baggage. I think you can call it that a little bit as well. They carry their baggage with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you then look at advice that you give these leaders, because that's what you do. You talk to them, you give them advice, you help them organize their life in a way that it's very effective for them. What is one counterintuitive piece of advice that you give leaders sometimes where they're like, that's something that doesn't really make sense to me right now, but then later they come back to you and say, Peter, that piece of advice, that really changed a lot for me.
Yeah, sometimes you can be the guy in the room that just gives them that kind of advice and never get from anybody. So one advice is that under a lot of stress, under a lot of pressure, go slow. It's advice I very often give leaders to go slow and sit in the present moment. Don't make grudges about the past. Don't plan for the future. Try to be slow, go slow, and understand the current situation. That's something that may be counterintuitive, but it actually helps leaders understand that if I keep going on too fast and planning for the future, I may not create the foundation or build the infrastructure, build the team today that can support me in this journey. So this is something that leaders tend to not value very high because the pressure is so high. How can you slow down? What on earth are you thinking about? But it sometimes they come back and say like, that was not too bad an advice you gave me that.
Yeah, I can really see that as well. When everything is moving at 100 kilometers an hour or even faster at that level where everything is just, it's busy, meeting, half an hour, another meeting. And then you say to slow down. It's like,
yeah.
How? And I can, and what? And I think I've tried that a little bit myself as well, to slow down sometimes, and you get another clarity of mind kind of at it. You can kind of go look at stuff again from I like to say the helicopter perspective always, because then you get a bigger view of what's actually going on, and you're not so focused on the small bubble around you.
Yeah.
About you as a coach, how do you stay sharp and inspired as a coach? Because I'm guessing with the frameworks, there's always something that's changing. There's always new ways of looking at things. How do you keep up to date and stay sharp in this field?
Yeah, I do a couple of things. So I am part of the philosophy where I align with International Coaching Federation, ICF. So that means that I commit myself to do a continuous education, continues to work myself, which I actually like a lot. So I always try to find new ways to develop my toolkit, my skill sets, my mindset. I also take a certain proportion of what I'm interested in about something that sounds very uninteresting. So I'm trying to stay open to the new trends. In coaching, the biggest theme right now is AI. Is AI going to take over coaching? Yes or no? So I'm immersing myself in that discussion, and I'm immersing myself in some of the studies, some of the research, to simply try to find my way around how do I add value as a coach. So I'm using these as my personal development and along to my own courses, and dealing with the big paradoxes of the time is a good way to also develop. I also have people I talk to who can help me on coach supervision. Sometimes I'm help me to talk through different cases I had, challenges. How did I work as a coach? Particularly when I felt like, that didn't go as I wanted it to. And then a good supervisor can help you talk through and see how actually my interventions was maybe not very successful. How could I have done it differently? Or maybe it was just something that was bound to happen. So I try to use a multiple number of aspects. And then I use a lot of time on self-reflection. So I rarely have leadership meetings or coaching back to back to back. I always have a space in between to gather my thoughts and do that reflection. I find this is a way I learn the best. So multiple number of things I'm trying to do. And coming back to what we talked about earlier, the fact that I'm curious by nature, it helps me a lot to keep going, to keep developing.
For sure. And It's interesting that you mentioned AI because that's obviously also a very hot topic at the moment. With can you just use ChatGPT to become your coach? I personally view it as you don't get the emotional aspect, and you don't get the emotional connection that you get when with like talking to you or to like a human being. How do you view that?
Yeah, I think the way when people say a coach will be replaced or not by an AI, I think the problem is we ask the wrong question. We don't need to think about it as a role being replaced. We need to think about the number of tasks.
Hmm.
And actually, when you break it down to a number of tasks a coach is doing, there are quite many of the tasks that coaches may not like, they're not good at: structure, follow up, analyze data and notes, where AI can be a tremendous help for you. So I think working with AI as a thinking partner, as an organization partner, as an agent for certain things can actually help you to be a better coach. And I would not be surprised if we would have like live coaching with some clients, and then there's an AI who does the follow up and accountability and these kind of things in between. So it's a blended approach. That would be
Hmm.
perfect, all right for me,
Yeah.
and that probably also going to help a lot for the client. So I'm not afraid about this. I think it helps coaches to sharp the edge. It helps coaches to think through what is the value that I add as a client, and how can I, by embracing AI, offering a better service to the customer, rather than it's me, my ego in the way, right? The ego comes up again also as a coach.
Yeah. So it's rather than one or the other. It's more that you like work in synergy with everything. That you use AI where you can and where it makes sense to use it, but you also use the human aspects where that makes sense to use it.
Yes, yes, exactly. So combination of that. So I'm positive.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds very positive because I also think the discussions right now are a lot, one or the other, and there are not many discussions of maybe you just combine it in such a way where it doesn't become one or the other. It just becomes together.
Yes.
Looking back at your long career and your coaching career, what is one of the moments that you're most proud of when I've coaching people?
Uh, I generally are proud when leaders I work with, they get an insight. You can almost see it in people's face, in their body language. They get an insight, and then you just need to be quiet, and then they make a plan, they change things very quickly. I think I'm proud of these moments because I see that something we talked about that was complicated all of a sudden becomes easy. It's like a light bulb moment for the leader, and he or she actually knows what to do, and they take accountability for that, to take the forward. So those are the moments I really like a lot. um, I also sometimes have moments where coaching do not work, and then you sit with a leader and you just go like, "Wow, now we work together. And we realize I cannot help you. I'm
Hmm.
not going to send you a bill. Not going to spend more time on you. Now we know what doesn't work." I think it's also quite revealing and quite liberating that you actually realize I add no value. So this is maybe where I'm a little bit proud of myself, because I step out of just not charging people for my service, but I realize I add no value. Let me get out of the way.
Yeah.
So that's two very different answers to that question.
I think that also takes a lot from you to say, because you could, keep on coaching them and take the bill, and then just maybe they don't get much out of it. Maybe they don't notice that they don't get much out of it. But I think that it takes a lot as well to say, okay, this is simply I can say this is not working. We're gonna take a step back, and then maybe at a later stage it will be working again. But for now, this is not working. I think it's a very important ability to have as well to do that.
I think it is, and it depends also on how you look at yourself. Is that me as a person who need to be recognized and my ego, or is it the service I'm providing? And I think if you know a lot about the leader and the leader's role and the challenge, that conversation is easier to have.
Yes.
And sometimes it's just not the right time. It may be the right time later, or maybe I'm not the right coach, or maybe coaching is not the right things. And the more you know about leaders you work with, the more you can have an open and honest conversation about it. So it's about
Yes.
understanding humans as humans.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you this also for if you had to write a leadership playbook based on all the stuff you've learned throughout your entire career, what would the first 3 rules be that you would write in this playbook?
A playbook for leadership.
Yes.
One would be to understand the system. There'll be something about the system thinking, understanding the system, understanding your role, how you impact, and how you're impacted by the system. That would be kind of one chapter. There will be obviously a chapter around how people performance and business performance are linked together, and problems in one or the other shows up very clearly. And the third one would be that leaders need to see leadership as something that can be fluent into the situation. So to the point of orchestration, that when you dynamically can allocate leadership of a given situation, of a given task to the right person at that time, then I think you achieve your self-maturity level very high as a leader, and also about the team. So that will be 3 maybe a little bit idealistic chapters. And for sure, there'll be a lot of practical tools and tips in the book as well, or in the playbook, to implement, because I think leadership is a very practical, hands-on job. So I wouldn't make it too theoretical, but that would be my starting point.
I like that you mentioned that it would not be too theoretical, because that's a lot of the stuff that's out there for these kind of things. It's a lot of theory, and when you then try to implement it without having coaching or someone that guides you with it, it's quite difficult to implement that theory into practice, because there's always something that's a bit different in your situation.
Yeah. So it's not fit for purpose, right? And leadership is very practical. You're in a meeting with a leader, you're in a meeting with your team, you're meeting with a client. It's very practical. You need to act there. You need to be like that. So, and if you're not bridging your theoretical aspects, which may be very relevant and needed, into something that's hands-on, you're not helping the leaders to translate your thinking or your data from your research into something that's meaningful for them. And then you're not very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work,
For sure.
It's an ego thing also. Sometimes. For people who write books, right? I need to sound clever.
That's true. That is very true.
Yeah.
So, Peter, we have this closing tradition on our podcast where we ask our guests to bring an object of significant meaning for them or their personal life. What did you bring for us?
I don't know if it comes up clearly here. So I brought my headset. It's a Bluetooth headset. It's a Bang & Olufsen EX series. And it matters for me for various reasons. I like good design. I'm a big fan of the Bang & Olufsen. So I bought them because I like things to be nice. It's well thought through. It needs to be something that's nice. It's important for me. As a coach, I also like to listen a lot, and headsets represent the fact that I'm listening with both ears. And as a leader, as a father, as a person, it's also nice sometimes to have a noise cancellation, that you sometimes need to shut off things, and you can listen to a little bit or something to focus on what's important for me. So that will be something that really represents aspects of me.
Nice. So a little bit to keep it going inside the head, sometimes shut off a little bit, be on your own.
Yes.
Block out the noise.
Exactly.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter, for coming on the podcast and sharing your experiences as a coach, your advice for other people who are in leadership positions. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. It's been a great conversation. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to our episode. If you want to connect with our guests personally, then give us a follow on LinkedIn at First Moves. We also have an Instagram at First Moves Podcast. And lastly, we ask you to leave a review. This will enable us to bring better guests on board and give you better content in the future. Have a nice day.